Hi there, I'm Adam Reilly. Unlike Sue O'Connell and Joe Mathieu here, I am not an official Lunch Hour Live host, or not official enough to have my own graphic, but I am hosting today as we look ahead to the New Hampshire primary. For what it's worth, I'm a reporter at WGBH. I'm joined to talk about what to expect from the New Hampshire primary by Sue O'Connell. Sue, do you want to introduce yourself? Just tell people who you are, what you do.
I'm Sue O'Connell, and I work I got that out of the way. I work over at NECN and NBC 10 Boston, where I'm a political analyst. I'm also editor at Bay Windows newspaper and South End News newspaper, and a WGBH contributor.
Then we have Joe Mathieu to Sue's right. He is our host for Morning Edition, and you have covered many New Hampshire primaries in your time, right?
I guess that's true. You start feeling old after a minute, but it's been a few, and it's a lot different now than it used to be. But I'm looking forward to the carnival that is New Hampshire. This is actually kind of fun, which we'll talk about.
It is. It's a spectacle. And then down at the end, we have Joanna Weiss. I frequently am on Beat the Press, our Friday media show at WGBH with Joanna. But do you want to tell people a little more about yourself?
Sure. I was a political reporter for many years at the Boston Globe, covered my share of New Hampshire primaries and other things. Now I write pretty regularly for Politico magazine, and I'm also the editor of Experience magazine, which is published by Northeastern University.
Excellent. Thank you. So I want to get right to our conversation about New Hampshire, but I would urge everyone who might be watching remotely, or if you're in the library and have questions you'd like us to answer or tackle, please let us know, and we will do our best to get to those. I've got a few that I want to run through with these guys, but we want your questions if you can get them to us. You mentioned the spectacle, Joe. Before I lied, I'm not getting right to the questions. I should note that WGBH News is going to be taking over part of the lobby of the Manchester Doubletree, which is that hotel right downtown that becomes, for this very brief period, kind of the center of the American political universe. You're going to be there for, is it 6 days straight, or am I getting, no, not 6 days straight. How many?
Well, actually, Morning Edition will be live the day before, the day of, and day after. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But, of course, WGBH News will be broadcasting there starting in the days before the weekend. Actually, Jim and Marjorie will be there through the weekend. And it's really something to behold. They cram every major network, every radio station, every website now, all in this one hotel, because there's no better place to do it in Manchester. And it turns into a bit of an Olympic event. And, you know, it draws an enormous amount of political tourism, which is a remarkable part of the primary. People wait to go on vacation to Manchester so they can shake hands with Joe Biden and see Elizabeth Warren, and you hear them comparing notes like, well, I got Warren, I got Biden here. You got a Buttigieg? I'm going to see if I can get Yang later. And it's a really interesting thing to watch as almost a pop culture event.
It also draws a lot of marginal candidates who manage to find you if you're a member of the media, and give you their detailed plan to address whatever, the dark web or something, and they're really earnest and they really want to talk with you, and it puts you in a position where you have to be kind of polite, but you also want to get rid of it.
Right, and if they have a button, you want to take that so you can put it in your collection.
That's
especially if it's Vermin Supreme.
Yes.
Take my word for it.
He's the guy with the boot.
That's correct.
Yes.
And is essentially the Libertarian nominee, which is quite a riot that he actually is being taken.
That you had to make that designation that he's the guy with the boot as opposed to the other guys also really kind of speaks to the variety of candidates that we don't get to cover as much.
Okay, so let's focus on the more mainstream candidates, the ones who look like they have a chance to win this at this point in time. I always check the Real Clear Politics of national polls, New Hampshire polls, Iowa polls. I know I'm not alone in that. You guys do too. Right now in New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders is at 24%, Joe Biden's at 16%, Pete Buttigieg is at 15%, and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren is at 13%. So I'm wondering if it's fair to say right now that this is a race for second place, or am I overstating it if I say
So I think, to me, the thing that just keeps happening in this race is the undecided number is still high, and not only is the undecided number high, there are some polls that say, are you totally into the candidate that you have picked? And they say no. So unlike prior races, both, in the Republican time, last time when they had so many candidates, there are still people who are choosing between 2 or 3 candidates, right? So although these numbers seem to be trending in a way, it still seems very volatile, and we could all be very surprised
That's right.
at Iowa and in New Hampshire.
That's why I think Iowa is going to be really important this year, maybe more important than in some previous years. When the contours seemed a little clearer at this point, because I think whoever wins Iowa, particularly if there's a surprise in Iowa, which you never know, that's going to carry momentum into New Hampshire, and people are definitely going to be paying attention. People like a winner. People like to go with a winner. People will, I think, glom on to someone who looks like they're rising. It's all about the big mo, I feel like, at this stage in the race.
But that can cut both. Sorry, Joe. That can cut both ways, right? Because you can also have New Hampshire voters looking at candidate X winning in Iowa and saying to themselves, consciously or semi-consciously, well, we want to put our stamp on this.
Right.
Okay, Iowa just boosted Elizabeth Warren, so let's go hard for Bernie Sanders.
The thing about Iowa too, which is interesting, is you don't have to win Iowa to win Iowa, right? Because of the complicated caucus system, which we don't have time to explain, you could come in fourth in Iowa and still be saying that you won Iowa, right? So it
Kind of like
gives-
ranked choice voting.
Yes.
But same with New Hampshire in a way too. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, Bill Clinton, in '92, came in second in New Hampshire and took it as a victory, and he was the comeback kid, because I think what he had done poorly enough in the standing and then just coming out with looking like he was on the rise coming out of New Hampshire was good enough for him.
You know the old John Sununu line, Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents? It's very often that we end up with two different decisions there. Iowa's about organizing, New Hampshire is about retailing, and New Hampshire brings surprises. Most people, it might be a small majority, but most people have not made up their mind, and they're independents. Independents pick the winner in New Hampshire, and everyone knows that going in, which is why you're seeing the Biden campaign make this real attempt at saying rational versus radical. We have to be able to appeal to independent voters in New Hampshire. But remember, there's always a surprise in New Hampshire. Remember when Hillary Clinton cried? It completely changed the race in 2008. Nobody could have predicted that. And after Barack Obama won Iowa, she won New Hampshire. That race went on forever after that. And we could have an instance where there are 3 or 4 different winners in the early contest states. Imagine where we're going to be then.
Remind me, and this is sort of a Peter Kadzis question. He's not here to answer it, but was it Ed Muskie who either cried or
Yes.
had some snow trickle down his cheek as he had an emotional moment in New Hampshire?
That's
Again,
right.
this sort of surprising,
Absolutely.
pivotal.
And it ruined his career
Yeah.
as opposed to helping
Cuts
his
both
career
ways.
because it was a different time.
Before I want to ask you about Elizabeth Warren in a moment, but as you noted, the various candidates seem to be headed in different directions. And right now, I mentioned that average of polls, Sanders' arc is upward, and the other 3 are downward. Just briefly, what do you 3 see as the source of Sanders' appeal, at least in New Hampshire?
Well, I think that, they've been doing a lot, the campaign's been doing a lot of work on the ground. I remember being at the New Hampshire State Convention, I think in August or September, and a lot of Massachusetts people were in the arena in New Hampshire for Elizabeth Warren, and a lot of the New Hampshire volunteers for Sanders were out knocking on doors and making calls. So
interesting.
within the arena, there seemed to be a lot more excitement for Warren than there was for Sanders, and it seems because they deployed their resources in a different way. So I think what you're seeing here is just a bounce that Bernie is having, and also a question of, has Warren hit her ceiling, or is there just an enthusiasm gap, or does she still have room to grow and she's just plateaued a little bit?
So for you 2, what's Sanders' secret?
I think the enthusiasm is really important. I think Sanders has a very particular way of exciting a crowd, of making people feel like they're part of a movement. And I think that's what he does maybe more than any of the other candidates. There's a lot of affection that some people have for Joe Biden. There are people who believe passionately in Elizabeth Warren. But with Sanders, you're buying into, the big Sanders fans feel like they are buying into something bigger. And whether you call it democratic socialism or you sort of call it, Bernie fever or feeling the burn, whatever he's using this time around. He inspires something that's a little bit different and a little bit stronger. And one interesting thing about his supporters is, and not in huge different numbers, but his supporters are a little less loyal to the Democratic Party. They're slightly less likely to say that if Sanders doesn't win, they'll definitely back the Democrat.
Well, that's a big part. People forget that Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat, and his opponents will tell you that the second he doesn't win this, he's going back to not being a Democrat. because a lot of them feel burned after the last race. I don't know that there's an explanation for what happened to Elizabeth Warren. Is it because she detailed her plans too late? Is there a dose of sexism involved here in American politics? It's really hard to tell. But I would also point you to an outlier poll, if I can call it an outlier, but the Washington Post ABC News had Joe Biden up over Bernie Sanders by almost 10 points among Democrat and Democratic-leaning voters, registered voters last week. That's a really
national or New Hampshire?
compelling number. This is New Hampshire.
Okay.
A really compelling number for the Biden campaign, and I know that's not factored into the real clear average.
I'm glad you
but
brought that
there's
up.
a lot of noise out there, guys. I don't know that these numbers are all where we think they are.
Listen, I'm gonna throw out my long shot, and I don't mean that she's a long shot, but I think Amy Klobuchar is actually the candidate to watch both in Iowa and New Hampshire. And I if I were a betting gal, and I'm not because my grandmother was a bookie, so I know not to bet. But if I were betting, I would be betting that after Iowa and after New Hampshire, we're going to see a very big amount of energy and enthusiasm and numbers around Amy Klobuchar.
She got the union leader, let's remember, right? And has long appeared to be a very good prospect as a sleeper candidate in New Hampshire.
Well, there's a lot of competition for that non-Bernie Warren spot, that more moderate, kind of practical, pragmatic person, which is exactly what she's pitching herself as. You know, Pete Buttigieg is also in that lane. Mike Bloomberg, we cannot ignore him. He has not been on the debate stage because he has not fit the rules of the debate stage, which require you to have a certain amount of fundraising. He is not entirely self-funded, but he is all over the airwaves and on the internet. My 11-year-old son came down to the kitchen table one day and said, I like Mike Bloomberg because he saw a YouTube ad.
And my 19-year-old, who isn't following the race that closely at all, said, Bloomberg, I know that name from somewhere. Does he own something?
Did you guys see the video of Mike Bloomberg trying to shake
Shaking the
hands
dog?
with the dog by grabbing its mouth?
Yes.
the other day?
The dog seemed happy
Saw
with
someone
it,
on
though.
Twitter say that for me is disqualifying. The dog didn't mind it.
Dog came back for more, so apparently maybe he's a dog whisperer and we just don't know it yet.
Let's dig into what has happened with Warren's campaign a little more. You mentioned some possible explanations. Just by way of a reminder, back in October, I keep citing these poll numbers, which you're right, which should be taken with a grain of salt, but back in October, on October 13th specifically, the average of New Hampshire polls had her at 28%, Biden at 24%, Sanders at 13%, and Buttigieg at 9%. And ever since then, it's been like the bottom kind of dropped out. You mentioned sexism as a possibility. She started taking heat right around that time for not having a detailed health care plan. Remember, she also wasn't comfortable saying that if her plan became a reality, that taxes would go up. She just kept saying costs would go down. Whereas Bernie Sanders, in the same debate where she wouldn't answer the question, said, yeah, of course taxes would go up, but you'd save a bunch on copays and deductibles and stuff. What else might account for her drop? What do you think?
Maybe a shift in the race as well. Kamala Harris has dropped out, and a couple of other big performers on the debate stage who were deflecting a lot of fire. Remember, Elizabeth Warren didn't really get into any kind of a standoff with anyone until it was recently with this Bernie Sanders issue. It was about Kamala going after Biden.
Right.
So, you know, every
You're
time
right.
somebody
She was able
moves
to
out of that
float
race,
above the fray,
sure, and that
and
changes
no
the
longer.
landscape. It changes the contest.
Well, and in doing that, I think she's had a couple of unforced errors. I mean, really, starting back to how she handled the Native American, you know, this pretty ridiculous, I think, Native American accusation, but she did not sort of present a good answer. She shifted, she
And she thought
equivocated.
she
Then she
had.
went
She
and
had
got
the
the
very slick
DNA
video,
evidence, which
right.
was a big tactical error. Then, you know, I think the Bernie situation in the last debate probably backfired on her a little
It
bit. I think
feels
a lot
that
of
way,
people were
doesn't it?
looking at that and saying, well, wait a minute, what are you accusing him? Why are you getting in the dirt with
Yes,
him?
right.
What's the issue here? And also kind of calling attention.
I think that's significant.
Yeah, calling attention to this question, which really didn't have to be asked about whether a woman can win or why is she the one asking that question?
And I've talked to some people who are door knocking and followed some folks on Facebook who are door knocking for Elizabeth Warren in New Hampshire. And I think there's some frustration on their end that people haven't made up their mind yet, right? They are still talking to people who they think should be Elizabeth Warren voters, right? And they're not. And so, I don't know why they're not, but at this point, Elizabeth Warren needs to have those
That's
people locked up, and she doesn't.
I want to get some audience questions in here. Just a reminder, you are watching the latest installation of the Lunch Hour Live series that WGBH puts on here at the Boston Public Library in our studios at the BPL. We're counting down to the New Hampshire primary. I'm Adam Reilly, talking with Sue O'Connell, Joe Mathieu, and Joanna Weiss. We would love to get your questions if you have them, whether you're in the audience or watching from work on your lunch break or something like that. I have a couple that I want to throw at you guys right away. someone unidentified asks, why don't we all just vote at once? Wouldn't that wouldn't that eliminate influence from
National
early
primary.
primary states? Would it be good, I guess, for American democracy if instead of letting a few states, which are not necessarily representative demographically of the country as a whole or the country politically, if we did that?
It'd be great if you live in California or New York.
Well, that's the thing, and as someone who's been around the entire state of New Hampshire, kind of watching the process play out, if, as Joe says, we let that out. Places, it would emphasize the importance, it would prove the importance of TV ads over anything else. It would basically mean that the election were decided by people sitting on their couches. The momentum, there could be no sort of momentum, there could be no personal vetting
And
of the kind.
in the biggest media market.
In the video, right, exactly. So, here you have these small media markets, they're imperfect, they do not demographically match the country, that's a problem. I mean, I think it's really interesting when South Carolina comes in right on the heels, because that's a very different demographic mix, and you have to do, appeal to a very different set of groups of people. But if it was all TV and internet ads, I don't think the vetting would be nearly as good.
And I don't think this is what the question, the person who wrote the question
All right,
also.
we always answer the question
yeah,
that we wish people had asked instead of the question we were
But
actually asking.
I'm continually shocked about how most people don't understand that the parties are not government agencies, right? These are not parts of our government. The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Socialist Party, whatever party there is run by these groups that are not part of the government. So if people want the primaries to change, both the Republican and the Democratic and the Independent, or however you want to slice it, they have to go to the parties themselves and make them change.
Since we're getting into the appropriateness or lack thereof of New Hampshire having this outsized influence that it does, let me ask the three of you. There seems to me to be this mini freakout every 4 years. You can set your clocks by it about two very closely related questions. First, whether the New Hampshire primary, whether the New Hampshire primary is still what it used to be, whether it retains its distinctive character and flavor and alleged charm. And then there is this additional fear of a loss of influence. Okay, whether it is or isn't what it used to be, do we matter as much as we used to? I'd like to tackle the first question about the character of the primary to begin with. Joe, you were just up there, right, watching John Kerry, the former senator and presidential nominee, do a house party for Joe Biden.
Yes.
You've also seen a whole lot of New Hampshire over the years. What's your sense of whether it still works the way it used to, with this sort of idealized image of a very important person, interacting with ordinary men and women on a human scale, talking with them, listening to them? Is it still what it used to be?
Oh, I think so. When you're in that room, it is. John Kerry felt like he was right back in there, and everybody in that room, I think, felt lucky to be there. And even though the candidate was nowhere to be seen, was somehow fulfilled by being part of this. They were able to ask questions. They heard, spoke one-on-one with the former standard bearer of the party. And that's a big deal in New Hampshire. It's hard to do that kind of stuff in larger states. It's not demographically representative of the country. We all know that. It is incredibly white and it's very small. But there are certain aspects of New Hampshire that I think make it important in that it provides this sort of staging area for candidates to be forced to retail, to shake hands, to explain themselves, to move around into different areas. And now it's only one of. When you think of the beginning of this, South Carolina, to your point, Joanna, is a completely different demographic. So is Nevada, and it's interesting. That wasn't an early state till 2008. They added Nevada to the list, which is a massive Latino population and a big union presence on the Vegas Strip. And Nevada can't get any respect. We tried to do that. We thought, boy, you know what? We're going to make this work here. We're going to get a lot of... Nobody talks about Nevada. They're never taken seriously to the extent that the other states are. So these things aren't that easy to change.
And I think for folks who maybe haven't experienced the primary season in New Hampshire, I want you to picture the most suburban area of Massachusetts that you can think of, right? And then picture a Saturday where you're driving on the streets and no one is out, right? Nobody is there. Maybe some kids are playing baseball or there's a soccer game. And then you come around the corner of this very suburban place and there's a big yard party and there's Cory Booker, right? There's suddenly this celebrity, which they all are. And that continues to happen in New Hampshire, where you just get to walk across the street and go, meet Hillary Clinton or meet Bernie Sanders.
Well, the candidates learn from that. They hone their messages. Their stump speeches change along over the course of the time. You know, they're testing themselves and they're, you know, kind of figuring their candidacies out through that process.
Joe, you had that great John Sununu quote. What was it? Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents.
Indeed.
Has New Hampshire's importance been reduced by, among other things, the fact that we have the Democratic National Committee throughout this primary process doing the winnowing that New Hampshire and Iowa traditionally do by requiring the candidates to meet increasingly high thresholds when it comes to small dollar donations and poll numbers? Also, as I mentioned, we've talked about there's criticism of New Hampshire as not being demographically representative. Julian Castro was very public about that, which is unusual. It may be that in the past you've had candidates who want to do well in New Hampshire saying, I shouldn't be worried about doing well here, but that's the first time I can recall it happening.
Yeah.
Do you three have any sense that the importance has been eroded a little bit?
Well, I'll just take a stab to answer it this way, in that the candidates are running national campaigns more than ever, and those of us in the media, in local media, feel it more than ever. When's the last time you interviewed Elizabeth Warren?
It's been, I don't remember the last time.
When's the last time she was on a network or on CNN, or it's all the time? They're not catering to the local media markets in the states that they want to win in the way that they used to, because they're on every cable channel all day, every day. Bloomberg, aforementioned, is the perfect example of that. Amy Klobuchar is going up with a 6-figure ad buy, apparently in the week running up to New Hampshire. Tom Steyer, anybody? No, it's national ad buys. Going back to what we were saying,
I should say Tom Steyer was kind enough
to
come here.
Didn't he? Yes,
but no, your point is very well taken.
So start calling campaigns.
New Hampshire, less important than it used to be?
I think it's still as important. I mean, the variety of candidates and the number of candidates that you have, you know, depending on who's incumbent, which party is incumbent, is going to shape how the race is run. You know, but at the same time, I would like to see the primaries pushed together more closely. I'd like to see. You know, New Hampshire has the state law that they are indeed the first primary in the country, regardless of what anybody else does. I mean, if somebody moves a primary to December, suddenly the New Hampshire primary is going to be in November.
Just by the way, as an intellectual exercise, couldn't say Wisconsin pass a state law saying whenever New Hampshire
well, then we would have
we're going to have ours the day
Supreme Court
before.
Argument that would go right to the Supreme Court. I'm sure there's no doubt about it. But I'd love to see them, you know, very close together, so that the candidates have to run in more than just Iowa and New Hampshire.
Although, how can they physically be in all those places at once? I mean, you know, that you need to winnow down those early states, and they need to be, as you had said before, small enough that you can actually credibly meet those people. I mean, that said, yeah, the debates have been pretty important this cycle as well, and the vetting that the party has done through the debates has had some sort of thumb on the scale, but I'd be sad to see New Hampshire go.
I want to show a little bit of video that Emily Sherrio and Linda Pollack from GBH's BPL studio got when they went up to New Hampshire a couple days ago. They talked to voters about where they were in the decision-making process, and those voters made a point that will sound familiar, I think, to us sitting here at the table and probably to many people in the audience. Let's take a look.
Have you made your decision yet on who you're going to support?
I have an idea of who I'm going to support, but I'm still open to change, I guess.
Yeah. Are you deciding between candidates, or are you still...
I am deciding between candidates.
What's it going to take for you to make the decision?
A variety of factors.
Like what?
You know, electability is one, policy is another.
I really have to spend a lot of time doing concentrated research, but I have not spent a lot of time doing that, so I'm really not sure.
Anyone you're leaning towards?
Not really. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff to consider.
So is there a form that you sign when you move to New Hampshire that says, I, under penalty of whatever, am not allowed to commit to a given candidate publicly before the day of the... Because sometimes, I got to say, it seems to me like they're milking it a little bit.
Listen.
I still haven't heard enough from the candidates. I've only seen each candidate 4 times.
I know we're talking about New Hampshire, but I was out yesterday in Copley Square getting, you know, interviews for Primary Source, our TV show over at NECN. I talked to 7 people who were all going to vote, definitely going to vote, but really they're not paying attention yet.
Wow. Really?
And I said, well, I'm definitely going to vote for the Democrat. I am a Democrat. I'm definitely going to vote. But, you know, it's not really important to me until our primary starts coming around, and then I can see
Boy.
who's out there. And it's just because they're living in the real world.
Yeah, there's that great, I think it's some kind of French phrase about professional deformation. You look at the world through the lens of whatever job you have, and we all have these jobs where we pay close attention to stuff for months on end and forget that a lot of people don't.
Crowded field doesn't help with that either.
I mean, one quick thing I wanted to say was that one of the people interviewed mentioned something we hadn't talked about before, which is that electability question. And that is really important, I think, to voters across the country. That, you know, the primary voters in the Democratic Party foremost want to beat Donald Trump. And I think that debate about which approach, the sort of, pragmatic or, really, really progressive approach is the best one to defeat Donald Trump, I think is kind of an undercurrent.
That's going to be kind of that was the pitch at the Joe Biden event that you asked me about on Sunday. You know who else was there with John Kerry? Was Bill Shaheen, Senator Jean Shaheen's husband. He spoke after Kerry did. And it was kind of like, okay, we heard from the secretary. Okay, now we're going to, okay, listen. And everybody kind of huddled in, and we all huddled in, and he said, listen to me. This is not about sending a message here. This is about electing the president, okay? There's only one guy here who can beat Donald Trump, can get the independents in New Hampshire, and I'll add one more, get the Senate back in Democratic control. He's the only one with coattails to get the Senate. He's the only, otherwise, you guys can all make yourselves feel good with Medicare for all. But this is the only, it was about the reality check, and I think we'll hear a lot about that, the electability reality check over the next week.
A lot of people, I think, find the concept of electability to be vague and potentially problematic. I think it's fair to say, tell me if I'm wrong here, that for example, some Elizabeth Warren partisans might see the phrase as having kind of a gendered connotation when it's applied to her. Witness that dust up with Bernie Sanders that we talked about a few minutes ago. Is electability too vague as a concept to be meaningful, or is it a handy metric? Is it like you know it when you see it?
Well, the factors that go into electability are the factors of our society, right? So racism, sexism, all those things actually contribute to electability. But when you get down to it, that unfortunately is what the potion is, and I heard
well, there's those factors, but then also, say, a candidate's ability to avoid unforced errors.
Right, yeah.
The whole constellation.
That other part of
but
it.
It's part of the mix.
I heard an elected official in South Carolina who was African American, and he was asked, why, this is early in the race when Cory Booker was still in and Kamala Harris was still in, why are you supporting Joe Biden? And he said, listen, black people know white people better than white people know white people. We know that Joe Biden can win, and we know Joe Biden is on our side, so we're voting for Joe Biden. And that I thought encompassed the electability conversation and ethos in a way that you don't think about when you're thinking about what the barriers are to being elected, but what the pathways are.
There's also electability in terms of policy. I would argue too, when you're saying, look, these plans can't pass. The only way you're going to get somebody elected is with realistic plans that people think they might actually believe might pass.
Except we don't have a wall yet. And we have a president who ran campaigning that we were going to have a wall, and Mexico was going to pay for it, and we still don't have either one of those, and he won.
He did, and he may win again.
He's still the president.
Any other thoughts on electability?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
I have questions.
I think this may be our last question, unless you really hustle and get us something fast. Again, well, there was one, actually. Let me sneak in two here. One person asked, do you think New Hampshire will still be the first in the nation primary 5 years from now? We kind of danced around this. Still going to be the first one next election cycle? Okay, there's the answer there. And I think our last question is, do you think if Biden or Bernie win both Iowa and New Hampshire, the primaries are basically over? Great question. So this is presumably one of them manages
If
to...
it's Biden, yes. If it's Bernie, no, because he's not going to win South Carolina.
Right.
And it's going to get confused as you go into the third and fourth states.
Yeah.
Joanna?
I would not count out a couple of the other candidates. One, to a lesser extent, Elizabeth Warren has a big field operation in some of these other states. There was a story in the Times. I'm trying to remember whether it was Michigan, maybe. I think she's
got the best national organization.
She has a big field organization in a lot of different places. She's got people on the ground. She's kind of working it and anticipating that she'll still need some kind of a boost after those primaries. And again, Bloomberg, who is on the air everywhere. We don't see him as much because he's not on the debate stage, so there's not as much to talk about, but people are seeing his messages, and I think they're thinking about him.
Yeah, I keep seeing Bloomberg, though, as the attack dog for the Democrats. Half of his spots generally are attacking Trump, where the Democratic candidates are not attacking Trump directly in that way. And he's already pledged that if he doesn't get the nomination, he's going to help staff the other offices. So I think, I don't know, I'm not going to say that Bloomberg isn't serious about being president, but I think he's serious about, in his idea,
an impact.
saving the country.
Absolutely right. And other campaigns are using it. A reminder that if we get this, Bloomberg's going to keep paying for us in the general. We've got $2 billion, some crazy thing coming, and that's a very different element that he's introduced in this race.
I think we're going to leave it there. Sue O'Connell, Joe Mathieu, and Joanna Weiss, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
It's really
Thank
fun.
you.
Just a reminder that this has been the latest installment of WGBH's Lunch Hour live series, which we do from our Boston Public Library studios. I'm Adam Reilly, and I'll be part of a big group of people at WGBH, including Joe and many others who are in New Hampshire Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I got that right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, before and up to the primary. So please watch us on TV, listen on the radio, and look for our coverage online. Thanks for watching. Guys, thank you.